Hi class, with this lecture we are going to look at organizational psychology and kind of look at how psychology applies to jobs. A big part of that has to do with our attitudes. So basically when we're looking at organizational psychology, we call it industrial organizational psychology, and we're really just looking at how we behave and interact with each other in the work environment, and then of course applying psychology to that so we can have those more positive and productive work environments. And when it comes to industrial organizational psychology, it's not something that's just limited to psychology as far as the field and career path goes. And basically, even as a psychologist, there are numerous options and opportunities to do a bunch of work. It's really easy to transcend into other types of fields being in psychology, because no matter what field you're going into, you're looking at humans and how we work together and how we best optimize that. So just a little note there. And then when it comes to IO psychology, there are really three main areas of the work environment that we're looking at. We're looking at the overall or the industrial side, and that really comes down to the types of employees that you're going to hire. And so personality plays a role in that. And then you look at the organizational factor, and that's really that social dimension. That's the hierarchies, that's the framework, maybe those objectives and goals of the organization. And then of course you look at the human factors, and that would be the workplace design. And basically, once again, we're looking at how people engage each other in the environment. And really in that too, you're also looking at space and figuring out how you set up your space to most optimize employee performance. And you kind of look at like feng shui type things too. So you are looking at how colors play a role in the workplace. That's a big component of when psychologists go and work for other types of companies, say like fast food restaurants, and some of the decisions they make in their decorations and their layout. So that would be an IO psychologist. And so like I said, when it comes to our job satisfaction and looking at how we engage each other in the workplace environment, our attitude plays a big role in that. And so basically when we're talking about attitudes, we're not really talking about our temperament. We're not really talking about our moods or emotions. I mean, those all kind of come together and help form attitudes, but basically our attitudes are just kind of like it says there, they're these evaluation statements. So our attitudes are based on our experiences in the past, and then we tend to compare and contrast those with things that are going on in the present. And we do add that emotional side to it, because when we're evaluating those past experiences or those past engagements with others, we tend to get emotional about it, right? We tend to either think of it as positive interaction or as negative interaction. So the way we feel about it has plays a role in that. And so that's reflective in our jobs too. So you could say that something like, I like my job, I love my job. That's reflective of your attitude. And when it comes to our attitudes, we have three components, and basically it's that affective and affect, like affective disorders. It means mood disorders. So we're talking about our emotions and our feelings. And then we have that behavioral component, and of course that's the action, that's the thing that you are doing. And then we have that cognitive. So the cognitive is that mind body side of our behaviors and just being alive and being human. Of course, though, animals have that too. But cognitive is kind of the mental side about it. So it's how we think. So we see, that main things that we're looking at there in psychology. We're looking at how our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors affect how we behave and engage others, which we're always trying to do in those more positive and productive ways. And so when it comes down then to our attitudes about something, work, for example, the three of those components, they're going to work together. Think of it a little bit as like Carl Rogers and that idea of congruency we need when it comes to balancing, you know, our self-concept. It's kind of the same way with balancing all three of these for our attitudes. You know, once we're able to kind of understand how we think, behave, and feel about something, then that helps us change how we engage that situation or say that individual or workplace. And, you know, that could really help improve how we feel about our jobs and then, you know, just how productive we are at our jobs. Alright, so basically we used to think that attitudes, you know, they were just casually related to your behavior. So it's kind of saying that they... Basically, what's that saying is that in the past, when looking at the mind-body connection, we really didn't put that idea of feeling into it there, right? And we know that that's not quite true, because we know that, you know, when it comes basically when it comes to anything we do, in things like memory, for example, our emotions and our feelings play a big role in that. And then that's really going to determine our motivation. You know, how motivated are we to do something? And then at the same time, we may have incongruency between our attitudes and our behavior. So something like cognitive dissonance. It's just that, you know, you may have a certain behavior, but your attitude isn't reflective of it. When it comes to the work environment, really the only one that I could think of off the top of my head would be like, you know, maybe you don't like your job and, you know, you try to keep you don't like your job, but you still go in and do your job, yet you have a bad attitude about it. You guys know what I mean. You've been there, or you've worked with people like that. You know, it's like you're still going to do it. I'm not explaining this right. Hold on, give me just a minute. It's not, okay, I did explain that wrong, my bad. Let's try this again, sorry guys. So, it would be, oh goodness, I'm trying to think. It would be like you go to work, and, well, no, that won't work either. Give me just a second, guys, let me brainstorm here for a minute. Because dissonance is when, you know, you think one thing, but it's kind of different from what's really going on around you. It's kind of a little bit of kind of illusional thinking, or maybe even like selective memory, selective type behavior, though. And so you have that dissonance, that incompatibility, when the way you feel about something is not how you're acting about it. So in the job, in the job situation, maybe you don't like it. It would be the opposite of what I just said. Okay, that's what I messed myself up there. So, you know, you don't like your job, but you still kind of go in and you know, you do what's expected of you. Or, you know, it could, and that would be a little dissonance. Or, you know, it would kind of be the opposite. Maybe you don't like your job, and you can get a little kind of delusional about it, and you know, that can cause you to kind of have a dissonance because you're kind of lost in space and not really paying attention to your job. That would definitely be, that is what I was trying to say. Okay. And so, what does that all mean? It really comes back to that ideas of mindfulness, you know, and really the first key thing there is, like anything in life, it's about balance. And if you find yourself in situations that are, you know, out of balance, incongruent, and you feel you can't change those factors, you know, you can always change the way that you think, you feel, and you behave, you know, and that really does manifest itself into your environment. And so you kind of see changes in the environment too, and a lot of that does come down to our attitudes, and then our attitudes are reflective of our behaviors. And then just to look at those variables that, denote that relationship between our attitude and our behaviors. And of course, the importance of the attitude, and just, how does it make you feel? Why is it that you have that attitude, or why can't you change that attitude? How does it relate to the behavior? Accessibility, how easy is it for you to let your attitude influence your behavior? How does that attitude and your behaviors change when you get those types of social pressures? And then, it just comes down to like I said, your past experiences and kind of those preconceived notions that we put on the present based on our past. And basically what these variables are telling us is that we combine them in certain ways, and so it can help us predict behavior. Because once again, as psychology, that is one of our goals. We're trying to explain, study, observe, and predict behaviors. And it all goes back to that idea of just, trying to help and keep everybody safe in society and keep us all moving along in those positive and productive ways. And we know that when it comes to our attitudes, once again, we say no, that it's stronger if it has something to do with a direct personal experience. And so that's kind of where mindfulness comes in, and just realizing that we can learn from our past, but at the same time we still have to be open to the present and open to the new experiences in life, even if it looks like we're stuck in a cycle and it's not going to change. We can always change the way we act, the way we respond, the way we think, and the way we feel about it, our attitudes. And that does help, right? And so when it comes to looking at job satisfaction, we like to think that, our attitudes play a role in that. And so, our attitudes affects our satisfaction, the degree that we identify and are involved in our jobs, and then of course, the personal empowerment that our attitude reflects, and how kind of worthy and worthwhile we feel at our jobs, kind of the meaningfulness of it, and how, other people appreciate us in the jobs that we do. So, so once again, you see that balance between the way an organization, a company is set up, and the way that the employees engage each other. And that goes for all levels of that organization. So generally, businesses that do well and have high employee satisfaction, those hierarchy levels are a little more fluid, meaning that, there's more communication between the different levels, and that makes it a lot easier to, manage crises and conflict when it comes up. And then just real quickly, we know that job satisfaction is just that feeling we get, that good feeling we get about our jobs. And then, like we said, it involves how we identify with that, because we kind of tend to equate our jobs to things like self-worth, self-esteem, and self-concept. And then, like I was just saying there, so when it comes to that idea of empowerment, and then that relationship between the actual organization and the people that work in the organization, we did generally see more positive attitudes when those organizations and goals are more in line. And more in line with, how people act and behave, and the attitudes that they express at that work. And, when there's a good organizational commitment, we see that sometimes people are, they won't really express this their dissatisfaction with that company or with that particular job, because ultimately they kind of believe in those organizational committee, and they believe in loyalty to a company. And then once again, when you have more open, more of those fluid hierarchies, you have that organizational support. And so on the lower employee end of it, we have the perceived organizational support. And that's how well we, as the employees at the bottom, feels like that company cares about us. And what we see is that when we have a higher perceived organizational support, or once again, we have those fluid hierarchies, so we have support at all levels. Everybody feels like they have a voice in the organization, and then basic human nature, we have to have some kind of motivation, some type of reward, so the rewards are high there. And then we have this idea that perceived organizational support is important where power distance is lower, and that's just going back to what I see, that idea of the fluid hierarchy, and support at all levels, and feeling like even if you're down way at the bottom of the totem pole in the organization, you could still go walk into like the vice president, CEO's office and have equal time to voice whatever comment, question, or concern, and have that address. So that's that lower power distance, because you don't just feel like someone's just kind of looming over you and that they don't ever care. It's when you have those more open relationships, you have higher employee engagements, turnarounds, and things like I just forgot the word there. Perceived support there. And then, of course, it just the more that the organization creates a more open and friendly and caring environment for its employees, then of course the more engaged and the more satisfied the employees are going to be. And a lot of times, employees that are highly engaged in the company, they do feel like what they're doing is worth it. And, when you have the opposite side of that, you have those disengaged employees that, they put that time in, but they're just, don't have that energy. They don't have that attention. They have cognitive dissonance there, and sometimes people get bored, and sometimes people, even though they may like the job they're at, it may just not be for them. So you do tend to kind of tune in and tune out and just not pay as much attention as maybe you used to. That's probably, Maslow would probably say that's when you need to reassess your hierarchy of needs again and figure out what is most important to you. And when it comes down to looking at satisfaction with work and this idea of engagement, it's not just about engagement among the people working at the place. It has to do with the actual work that is being done too. So, a lot of times people sitting in office jobs, maybe, typing at computers, it could be very boring, very tedious. So, organizations want to try to find new ways to get people engaged and involved in their work. Some good examples would be like, there are those companies that now they don't just have the cubicles and the desks like they used to. They have like open offices, they have like equipment people can walk on, or they have like desks you can stand up on, or just, give you different options for being able to go about doing your work. So so they keep that satisfaction and those engagements levels high. And then of course how you feel about that is going to play a role in that too. And then just like psychology, we like to go and prove stuff, and then we like to go back and disprove everything that we said. So we look at these ideas of engagement, this power distance, fluid, not rigid hierarchies, and we asked, do those attitudes, are they really something that are indicative of how satisfied people are with the work, or how much more productive productive you can make people. It's kind of basically what it's saying is like, you know, even though we can present all these kind of awards and have these open, can we really, you know, can we make people work 16 hours a day and be happy about it? And that's really what they're talking about on this slide here. And so, you know, I have to laugh a little about that because, you know, that's a big part of it too. It's, you know, we still live in a capitalistic society. Henry Ford, the you know, the assembly line, and you know, you got to get the most bang for your buck. So a lot of IO psychology is kind of looking at that, you know, how do you make people most productive and say in a feasible working hour? And if, you know, say 8 hours a day isn't good, can you, or if they're excelling at 8 hours a day, maybe then you make them go 9 hours a day or 10 hours, like I said, 16 hours a day if you can get away with it. And then on the other end, you could say, okay, well, another way to save money is to say, well, if we could be this productive in 8 hours, can we get that same amount of productivity done in 6 hours time? So, you know, these are all factors that go into looking at the psychological nature and environment of work. Kind of cool. Some of it's a little boring, but some of it's kind of cool stuff. All right, so this is a kind of cool graph here. This is just looking at the worst jobs of 2016 as far as, you know, the people who were least satisfied with their jobs. And we see news reporters, firefighters, and advertising salespeople seem to be least satisfied, and so it's pretty interesting there. And I could imagine those are kind of stressful jobs. All right, and so then just, I think we've already had this, but just re-summarizing, job satisfaction is those feel-good feelings we get from doing our job, and just, you know, how we feel and care about the job we do. And then looking at job satisfaction, we have ways to measure that, because remember, psychology is a science, so we're always going to have our empirical data that we want to present. And we have the single global rating, and basically it's just like a sliding scale, you know, basically, you know, if dissatisfied to satisfied to neutral to highly satisfied. You guys have seen those types of scales and tests before, and so you just circle, color in the number, and then, you know, of course they go and they add all that up and plot it out on the chart like one like we just saw, and then they you know, take that data and they rank it then by country, right? So they say, okay, so on a global scale, who is most satisfied with their jobs and where do they live? I'm laughing because you guys are, I'm not quite sure I agree with our data that we have in this lecture on those ratings. It's kind of interesting. And then the second way that we go about gathering data for job satisfaction is just summation. And basically summation, it would be more like a, you know, it's a summation. It's more like probably listing items and then asking you, you know, how you feel about those different ones. Kind of like some of the, that one personality test we took, and it was kind of like, do you feel like you're more like this, or you're more like that, or, you know, is it this third option? That's kind of summation. And then, you know, based on the number of those responses of how you answer, which relates, they kind of relate stuff like that back to that, the big 5 personality theories. So we break it up in those 5 categories, and then, you know, they kind of group them up, and then they provide an overview of what your answers mean. So, you know, summation, you're kind of summarizing, you're taking it and adding it all up to get this bigger picture. Alright, so in the past 30 years, we see that according to data, most people in the U.S. and the rest of the developed countries are pretty satisfied with the types of jobs and the careers they have. Of course, though, we see in times of recessions, depression, economic downturns that, people become a little more disgruntled with their job. Maybe if, things like a lot of closures, the perceptions that other people are taking your jobs, all of that kind of relates to job satisfactions too. And so, like I said, it's just going to depend on what those facets are. So, what factors are involved in your job, that either help you to enjoy it or not enjoy it. And then when it comes to looking at job satisfaction, there are cultural differences. And those differences just come down to, what are the values about work that help us decide how satisfied we are with it or not. And we know that money is a huge motivator, but it's interesting to note with this graph that the actual monetary reward is not the main motivator for why people are happy with their jobs. It really has to do with the type of job you're doing and the people you're doing it with. So if you like the work, you like the people you're doing it with, then you're generally going to be more satisfied with your work. And this is where I have questions. So I understand that. I think that makes sense. But in looking at it on a global scale, what we see in this graph is that people who live in Mexico are the most happy with their jobs. Yeah, think about that for a second. That seems a little skewed somehow, doesn't it? It doesn't, given politics and history and economics, that just doesn't seem to add up. And I couldn't really find any more information to help disassimilate this graph here so that we could understand those figures more. But, and then when you look at the next country that was just, within a 0.1% their difference, we see it's Switzerland. Major cultural differences between both of those countries, right? Not even cultural differences, major work environment differences. So, interesting. Alright, so we see that jobs where you're constantly challenging your employees, so you give them independence to kind of do their own thing and add to the company. You give them a variety of work to do, so you keep them from getting bored, you keep that motivation high, and then training and just feeling like as an employee you have some kind of control over your work environment. Seems to help people feel more satisfied with their jobs. And then once again, just like we saw in that couple graphs ago, that the type of job you're doing and how well you like it, and then the people you're doing it with, that seems to what applies to people's ideas of being satisfied with their job way more so than those monetary rewards. And so this is basically saying the same thing that I've just said for 2 slides now, guys. And it's just kind of giving you a little more psychological understanding of the different terms involved in that. Oh, and I guess it is important, let's point that out here on this slide though, personality. So, not only is it how well do you like the work and the people you do it with, it's just, how well do you see yourself, what's your self-efficacy and kind of self-esteem and self-concept about it. And of course, generally when we think not more highly in that narcissistic way of ourselves, but when we have a good inner self-worth and we believe in ourselves and we do the best we can, we tend to be a little more satisfied with our work environment, than people who probably have a little more negative and pessimistic outlook of themselves and life. We won't reiterate the rest of that. So this is the other graph I find kind of interesting too. So even though pay, it's so weird because money is such a motivator in our society, but it does seem that according to this scatter graph or plot graph here, that the people who make the least amount of money seem to be more happier than people who make more money a year. So that's kind of interesting. I guess they're right when they say money can't buy you happiness or love. That chart kind of proves that, So I find that weird. So the people who are happiest live in Mexico, Switzerland, and they only make about $20,000 to $40,000 a year. Interesting, huh, guys? So, also when it looks at job satisfaction, once again, thinking about that the actual organization and, the higher up you go. So, the corporate responsibility and, the social responsibility. What are the goals, the laws, the behaviors of that overall corporation, and how does that then trickle down to employees and just the environment that you're in. And so a lot of times we see, especially nowadays, there's more drives and incentives for more corporate social responsibility with bigger companies. And so we look more into kind of environmental sustainability type stuff, and they do more nonprofit and charity giving. Actually, that last part isn't true, because when Rockefeller in the 19th century, there at the turn of the century, and they started working on improving working conditions for the factory workers, pretty much. Rockefeller understood that, in order for him to be the millionaire that he was, he needed all the little people at the bottom working their little fannies off, right? And he needed them to be happy doing it. And so he started a lot of charitable and non-profit organizations to help people. So a little interesting historical fact there. So think about that in terms of IO psychology and these ideas of job satisfaction, because because what do we see? We see there's a little bit of manipulation involved too, because nobody really wants to work. Nobody, we didn't really have to go to work. We wouldn't do it. So we've got to be motivated and manipulated to do it. And a big part of that is making us believe that we are happy about doing it, right? And then, of course, as we know, happy workers are productive workers, like we just said, and we know that organizational citizenship behavior, and basically what that means is that it's just you behave then, and probably a more mindful way is what it is talking about. And by you then being more mindful, maybe more compassionate and caring, then that translates over to, say, the customer base and the consumer. And so when your employees are happy and productive, then that helps keep the customers happy, and that helps keeps the whole goods and service market going and everybody making money, right? And then that's the last little point there, is that when it comes to job satisfaction, it's like I said earlier, a lot of times we equate our lives, our personalities, our self-worth, self-esteem, concepts in the context of our jobs. And so we do see that the more satisfied you are with your job, the more satisfied you seem to be with your life in general. But of course there has to be, you can have a really good job and have a really crappy home life, so that's kind of a casual correlation there, I would say, because you can happy job, happy life. There's a lot of other things going on before you can, say that equals that. But I do see how, but I do see how, that those factors relate to each other to improving your just satisfaction and health and well-being overall. And then, of course, we have the opposite side of insatisfaction, and we have dissatisfaction. So what happens when we don't like our job? And usually we see that there are 4 types of response. We have the exit strategy, and that's where you just quit. You have the voice attempt, and that is where you speak up and you voice your opinions and you try to change things. And then you have the loyalty response. That's probably a little more submissive, passive response. And, it doesn't have to be negative. It can be a very optimistic one, too, where, you know that it's good organization and you really don't think you should criticize them because they're going to turn around and do the right thing, right? And then, of course, you have the neglect response. And this is a very passive one. This is when you just ignore everything that's going on and then things just they just quickly go downhill. And then what does that mean as far as employee goes? You see a lot of people not showing up for work. You see low productivity, a lot of errors, probably costing the company a lot of money and a lot of time. And then here is just a little graphic illustration of those types of responsive. And so we see, we have it set up to where we have the constructive and destructive ways to handle your satisfaction, and then we have the active and the passive way to handle that. So that active way would definitely be a more assertive type way. So, they don't have that. I would say that neglect and exit, those are destructive. They could be very aggressive, right? And so, like anything in life, we always want to try to be, as positive and productive, active and constructive as we can be in life, even if we're unhappy with something. We still try to learn from that is what I'm trying to say. And then, of course, once again, the biggest thing of employee satisfaction is just dissatisfaction, is just that counterproductive behavior. And we see with counterproductive behavior that can have all sorts of problem in the workplace at all levels, and to the point that it can be something that I could end up, closing a company down for good. So, of course, as, the CEO, the person at the top of that corporation, that organization, this is what you're trying to avoid, this counterproductive work behavior. And so then that's why you would get an IO psychologist to come in and help to figure out how to improve that environment. And then, of course, when it comes to dissatisfaction, high turnover rates, that means, you have a lot of, people are always constantly getting hired and getting fired. Of course, then just people not showing up for work or showing up late, absenteeism, not going to work at all. And then, of course, workplace deviance, and that would be things like I don't think, though, that saying unionizing is an actual deviant thing. And, unions are something that they've kind of been skewed. Once again, go back to that example I said of Rockefeller, back in the 1900s when they start looking to improve working conditions for people. There was the idea that, the little people working in the factories, working 20 hours a day, pretty much locked in those factories, and, dead of winter, not have any way to keep warm, dead of summer, and they're like dying from heat exhaustion in there, and they would lock them in. Lots of times people got locked in factories and would die, so something would catch on fire, and then, people couldn't get out. That happened a lot in those early years. So unions forms as a way to protect people at work. So it's not necessarily a deviance. Unions are good things. Unions make sure that you get paid fair price for the work you're doing. Unions make sure that people get health care benefits for work that they're doing. But like I said, people kind of demonize unions, and we see that psychology kind of takes that stereotype too, right? So anyway, just something to think about. But we do see types of deviant behavior with things like stealing, tardiness, and just that idea of undue socializing. So maybe it's either socializing too much, maybe not socializing enough. Sadly, in our culture and this day and age, we have to be careful of, people snapping. So workplace deviance would definitely be something like a mass shooting. And so once again, these are what IO psychologists work on trying to prevent in the workplace environment. And then lastly, just feeling, once again, having a rigid hierarchy to where you feel like the person who is in charge of you or the people higher up, they don't get it, they don't listen to you. And just like anything in life, the more that we are able to listen to each other, the easier it is then for us to kind of reduce conflict and find those more positive and productive ways to engage each other. And then just to wrap it up here, we're getting ready to wrap this up here. So basically, when it comes down to management, why is a workplace with happy workers a good idea to have? And it's because it's like everything we just said. It's because when you make the people happier, the employees happier at work, then the higher ups are happier, the shareholders are happier, the customers are happy, and you keep that assembly line going, and you keep that system of goods and services going, and everybody gets paid and goes home at the end of the day happy. And so it's very important that management be aware that they make these be aware that they have a positive and productive work environment. So basically what I'm trying to say is that they know that by keeping people happy and satisfied at work, by keeping them challenged, keeping them engaged, that that is the way to get better work environments. And because we live in a culture and a time where we must have work, if we want to survive in society, and work environments, once again, we have all these different environments in society that we have to balance out how we feel about ourselves and who we are in each of those environments. And the more we put ourselves in those environments that are more happy and productive, then we do find ourselves more satisfied with our lives overall. And then that does translate to our work environment, because the majority of us spend a lot of time in our work environments. And why be unhappy with something that you have to invest a lot of your time and energy in? So I kind of believe take that Jungian perspective, and if you are dissatisfied with the job that you are doing, I'm not saying just jump up and quit that job, but definitely consider your options and figure out what is going to make you happy and satisfied, because it just helps. It'll help you out, it'll help that workplace out, and it will help whatever other workplace out. But it all starts with self, right? We have to change ourselves to set the example. We have to change our attitudes to set the example, and we have to show that in our behaviors and our engagements with others. And we when we have those more positive and productive attitudes of self, and the environments and others around us, then we definitely create a more satisfying world for all of us. So alright guys, that's the end of the slide and our lecture today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. As always guys, I am here for you, and I will EC you